Hello and welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour, the weekly bridge to the future of the piano tech community. I'm David Anderson.
And I'm Ethan Janney. And we're here to ask great questions, and then we'll shut up and listen to some of the authorities, experts, and most outstanding personalities in our little world of pianos.
So, put on your best set of headphones and let's get started.
This is Piano Technicians Masterclasses event called Piano Tech Radio Hour. We talk to the coolest people in the piano industry, the smartest people in the piano industry, bring some really interesting things to talk about. And Piano Technicians Masterclasses that brings you this event is an online educational resource that offers you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at www.pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And today we have Ken Eschete, and I'll give you a little bit of a bio in here. He gave me some info, and there's a lot of cool things in here that I wasn't even aware of. So I'll read through all these interesting tidbits, and then we'll start chatting with him. So, and I'll make sure you all have yourselves muted. Let's see here. I'm hearing a little bit of a noise from somebody. Okay. PG Milky at Yahoo. For some reason, I cannot mute you, so please mute yourself. All right. Okay. I don't understand why I can't mute you. Okay. Here we go. So Ken is originally from New Orleans, studied music in college, and played in the military band at West Point. And then following his service in the military, he attended Tulane University, was awarded a fellowship to study conservation at the Smithsonian Musical Instruments Division. He remained as a contractor at the Smithsonian and completed 3 major conservation projects on historic pianos. A few years later, Ken completed an internship at Colonial Williamsburg and was elected to the Professional Associate Membership in the AIC, which is the American Institute of Conservation of Works of Art. Other conservation treatments on historic pianos have included the Abraham Lincoln piano at the Chicago History Museum, the Vanderbilt Mansion Steinway in Hyde Park, New York, and the Washington State Capitol's historic Bluthner piano. He now lives in Spokane, Washington, and still travels around the USA treating historic pianos. Current projects include a Pleyel grand piano at Cornell University's Historic Keyboard Collection and another Steinway grand piano at the Valkill Mansion in Hyde Park, New York. So Ken is coming to us today with a bit of a more prepared lecture than we might typically have. And so that should be pretty cool. There's 3 parts, and we can have questions, but maybe keep your questions to the chat, and we'll kind of filter them while he talks, so he can kind of keep up with his pace. But in between each of the 3 sections, there'll also be a little bit of a pause where you can address questions and comments specifically. So Ken and I also, I'll just say really briefly, Ken has been a great mentor in my path. When I live in Chicago right now, but I had moved to New York for a while. When I was living in Chicago back around 2007 or 8, I approached Ken. He was working at Northwestern University in the keyboard department there, maintaining a bunch of instruments, along with Bill Schwartz. And I met these 2 great guys, and I proposed to kind of hang out and learn from them in exchange for tuning some pianos. And a great time was had by all, and I learned a lot of great stuff. So I'll always appreciate that time of mentorship from Ken. So yeah, Ken, what would you like to say?
Well,
You ready to
I'd
hit
like to say that it was really great to run into you in the earlier years of your exploring what you were going to do. And I remember you were interested in music cognition, which was a new course of study at Northwestern. And I knew the professor very well, so I twisted his arm and got you in so that you could monitor without being enrolled. And I believe that led to some further study at a small school in New York City where you got a PhD. So
That's correct. Yes,
Dr.
that was a
Janey,
step
yeah.
along my path. That's
That's
exactly. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Ken, you need to be a little louder.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not exactly sure how to do
I might be
that.
able to. I might be too loud,
Can-
actually. Maybe it's.
Yeah. Can I? I can go into my stuff here, system preferences, and do my microphone thing. Let's try that. Sound. Let's see. We want output, USB, nano, output volume.
And also, if you have a mic, is your mic on your headphones, or where is it? Is it in the computer?
No, it's actually sitting right here. I just moved the gain up on it. Is that better now?
I don't know if it changed much, but yeah, if you're just as close as you can get to it, it's not like you're super quiet. And I think it's probably in with respect to me because I have this mic like sitting right next to my face. So
Ethan, Ken, I'll just tell you before my volume was down, so I could hear Ethan well, but not you. Now I turned my volume up, and you're both fine for me.
Okay,
cool.
All right,
Yeah.
good.
And
Well,
Ken will
thanks
mostly
for
be
checking that
talking,
out.
so you all can adjust your volume to his level there, and I'll move my mic a little bit farther.
Yeah, and I have a lot of talking to do. So thanks everybody for showing up, and I want to especially thank various students of mine around the country and around the world. I teach an online course on replacing soundboards, building soundboards, and doing bridge capping. And we have students that have enrolled in this online course in Europe and in South America, Australia, and in the United States. And I know many of them have been watching this program too. So I just wanted to say hello to my students. As Ethan mentioned, my background in museum conservation is kind of unique for a piano technician. And so I have many times sort of reached into that toolkit to find solutions to problems that we experience in normal situations. So in this way, by thinking outside of our usual rules and actually looking at things in a very small way, that is literally under the microscope, discovered some interesting big solutions, big ideas that came from little tiny things. So that's the theme of my talk today. I've got 3 illustrations of this, and I'm going to run through them quickly. I'm going to stop after I finish each of the 3 examples, and I'll take just a few questions if anybody has them at that point, but then I want to move on because I want to cover all 3 of my subjects. So the first one, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see, we practiced doing this before, so I know how to do it, right, Ken? Okay, that I'm sharing my screen now. And
yeah, looking good.
Okay, great. So yeah, this was my opening slide. Shout out to all my students and our web address for anybody who's interested in the courses. But back to our subject here, and that is a word we use in museums called consolidation. Museum conservators, these are people that are dedicated to restoring works of art and really making sure that all parts of them are kept and integrity of the object. So there are situations in which, say, a wooden statue might be falling apart just from age, and the idea is there a way to hold this together from the inside by saturating something into the wood of this statue and creating sort of an interior structure, something that doesn't show, but something that holds it together. So in this kind of treatment, a resin of some sort is dissolved in a solvent. That solvent will make things thin enough to where it will soak into the the substance. It could be stone, it could be wood. And when the solvent evaporates off, we're left over with the resin inside of the object, creating this structure. So this over here, I'm using my cursor to kind of point things out. This is like looking at a box of soda straws, but these are actually wood cells. And this piece of wood has been treated with a synthetic polymer that dissolves in a solvent. And my next slide shows this a little closer. You can see that these are plugs of this resin inside of the wood. So this is kind of a regular thing in museum conservation, that we reach for a particular resin, which is called B72. It is, it's an acrylic polymer. And just a kind of quick organic chemistry lesson here. Thermoplastics are long chains of molecules like this, which when they're exposed to a solvent will break apart. The solvent will break the bonds between them so that they just kind of float around in the solvent. But when the solvent goes away by evaporation, they will rejoin into the long chain molecules and become a solid. So just like we start off with, say, an acrylic key top, and we put it in a jar with acetone, it breaks up into a liquid. But when we put it on a hammer and the acetone evaporates off, part of that key top is in between the fibers, and it makes that hammer harder. So that's a real familiar example for us of what is known in museum world as consolidation. Well, I was struggling actually with all of this, particularly dealing with acrylic key tops and acetone, trying to do voicing. And I started noticing that there was a particular problem with that, in that it seemed like the hammer would develop a kind of zingy sound sometime after I put it on, usually when the concert started. And it was something that had to be voiced out. So we're kind of going back and forth trying to put acetone and key tops to make it harder, brighter sounding, but then it got too zingy. So then we had to needle it down, in which case it wasn't so bright, and it's just kind of going back and forth. So I decided that I would try B72. That was something that I had in my toolkit. So I tried it with various solvents. I found that grain alcohol, actually Everclear 190 was my solvent of choice. And what I found was that it worked pretty well. And I was encouraged to find that a couple of researchers at UC Berkeley published an article in the the Journal of the AIC. And that's actually where these photographs came from, because I don't have access to a scanning electron microscope. But what they did was they took this piece of wood and they treated it. And then they went through and sliced it apart in like layers of a cake. And then they examined each one of these layers and counted the number of plugs that they saw in the cells. And then they plotted those out onto a graph. They did the same thing with B72 dissolved in alcohol as they did with acetone. And they are looking for evidence of where the resin winds up. It's not where we put it necessarily. It's what we want to know is, where did it stay? And this is their results. And it showed that with acetone, the degree of concentration was close to the surface, but as soon as they got away from the surface, it went down. When they did it with alcohol, that is ethanol, a grain alcohol, what they found was that the concentration went up as they went inside, that the concentration was lower at the surface and more inside. So what that told me was that if this is a hammer that we're looking at instead of wood, do I want a concentration of hardener on the outside, or do I want a concentration on the inside? Now, if I was doing this in reverse, suppose I was saying, I want to make this hammer softer. Would I want a really shallow needle or a really deep needle? This is the kind of the same thing where whatever we wind up doing to a hammer depends on how deep it is. And so I started trying this out with B72 and found that it was really quite successful for voicing hammers, particularly with alcohol. And the reason is this, and this is something that's difficult to grasp right away, but this is an example here. These are just dots of ink. But if our concentration of liquid, this is kind of the shape that I might have if I'm using lacquer and lacquer thinner. You know, that I'm going to apply lacquer over here. I'm going to wait for it to look wet in this kind of shape, kind of like somebody's handlebar mustache. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what I'm getting. A hammer that's just like it is when it's wet. But in actuality, this might be more like what I'm getting, because unless that's a really slow solvent like alcohol, a lot of our material that we put in is not going to stay where we thought it was. It's going to migrate towards the surface where it's evaporating. And this is called reverse migration. And it has nothing to do with people that are moving back to Mexico. This is a matter of resin moving along with the solvent towards an evaporative surface. So here's a little something about B72. It's very cheap. This is 2 places so that you can buy it. I get it from conservationresources.com. That's a national supply house for museum conservation stuff. But Dale Irwin also sells it at his website on his online catalog. That's irwinspiano.com. And it comes in little clear beads. You measure it. A mixed ratio that I use is 10 grams of B72 to about 4 ounces, fluid ounces of solvent. And I prefer the alcohol, but denatured alcohol will work. Acetone works very well, but it has a different effect. In this strong solution, I only use it for low shoulders and maybe the very top 4 or 5 notes of a piano. But normally what I do is I will dilute what I've just made to half strength by adding another 100 milliliters or 4 fluid ounces of more solvent. And that I use near the strike point. Getting it to dissolve can be kind of tricky. So I've found out that if you tie your B72 in a sort of tea bag of white material and suspend it on a string into your solvent, then the solvent can attack it from all directions and it's ready a lot sooner. That's a little tip. So this paraloid B72, it's non-hazardous. It has no noxious odor. It's relatively fast acting, produces really good results, and it's inexpensive and doesn't require a learning curve. That is, it's just like all the other hammer hardening that you've ever done. You know pretty much what you want and where you want to put it, and this is just an easier way to do it. So that's B72. It came off the shelf of my museum conservation lab and became really quite a handy thing. So, and it's become really kind of popular. I think many of you may have heard about this. And for more information, there's an article that I published in the PTG Journal. There's a little mini class that's on the PTG website for the Academy. So that's one example. And unless there are any questions, I'm going to move on to my next example.
I don't see any specific questions, but
Okay.
we can take this opportunity to let people share if they have one. And if there's nothing that pops out immediately, then we'll hop right back in. Anybody got anything? All right, let's roll.
Okay, good.
Wait a sec.
I'm sorry.
Wait a sec. Yeah, Dave Skolnick, what's up?
Yeah, I wasn't fast enough with the typing chat, so I'll just pose this and then I'll disappear. Is there any relationship in terms of the movement of the material between what you just described and the way lacquer would work? Or is that also a matter of whatever the solvent that the lacquer is in? Or is that a question that you don't want to address?
No, I see what you're getting at. And I think that the lacquer and lacquer thinner that we use on Steinways, it takes overnight to dry, sometimes longer than that. A slower drying operation is going to leave the resin, the nitrocellulose resin, deeper inside, and that's one of the effects that Steinway likes about the sound. When we're actually in the field, or if we're dealing with a Steinway in the showroom or someplace where we can't really pollute the air with lacquer and lacquer thinner because of the smell, and we don't have the time because the concert's going to start in an hour, we need something on hand right away. And I'm not saying that this replaces anything. It's just another tool in the toolbox. I've got my lacquer thinner. The B72 has completely replaced everything else, though. That's a matter of, and actually this reverse migration is something that I'll show you in the next section, is something we can plan on. Sometimes that's exactly what we want. So I hope that answers your question.
Looks like he's good. Now people have, gotten their fingers on the keyboard. So we got a few things in here. Let's see if we can hit them, and just let us know if if it's time to move on to the next section, we can leave them on the table. One said, could you return on dissolving it faster in the jar? Could you return on dissolving it faster in the jar?
Yeah. Yeah, so the idea is that if you can see in this picture, I measured out my B72 on a piece of bed sheet. And then I just tie up the edges with a piece of string to make a sort of tea bag. So if that tea bag suspended off the bottom of the jar, then the solvent is free to get at it from all directions. But if I just leave it in the bottom of the jar, it forms a layer of gel and junk, that you can't really stir up very well. So this is just something that helps it. If you're using 190 proof ethanol, you don't really need the tea bag. It's going to dissolve. You just need to shake the bottle every now and then over a period of 2 days. If you're using denatured alcohol, it takes a longer time. And acetone, it dissolves quite readily. So that's the difference in how it dissolves. The particular difference that I'm more interested in is the evaporation rate, and can I count on that resin staying where I put it, or is it going to go somewhere else? Okay.
Great, thank you for that. Is it reversible? Is B72 reversible?
No.
Nancy Salmon asks. Okay.
No.
Ernest Unrau. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm highly suspicious of anything that is said to be reversible in hammer voicing. Now it is something that, one solvent will attack things faster than another. I talked to a technician who was said that he voiced with B72 and he wasn't really happy with it. So then he used lacquer and lacquer thinner and he wasn't really happy with that. Then he went back over to B72 and he put some on and he said it made it worse. And I said, okay, what was the solvent you were using with the B72? And he said acetone. I said, well, there's your answer, because acetone really does affect lacquer quite well. So he washed a little bit of his lacquer away from the strike point and he lost some ground rather than gaining ground. So yeah, the solvent will make a difference, but in terms of what I think of is, can we get this back out of the fibers? No, I don't think so. I don't think that that once that resin is set, that it's going to dissolve very well with you just putting some other solvent on it.
All right, I got a couple more. Ernest Unrau says, does methyl hydrate work as well as grain alcohol, or is it a matter of grain alcohol is less of a fume hazard?
All of that. I think that ethanol is, and grain alcohol is something that a risk that I have been accustomed to taking. I actually drink this stuff from time to time in various forms, martinis and such. I don't drink Everclear 190, but yeah, when I find something that is not so abusive on me, and I'm not worried about cancer risks and things like that, then that's the solvent that I'll go with.
And then one last one before I move on. Diane Hofstetter said, can it be used to strengthen the wood in action parts of antique pianos?
That leads us to the next section. Terrific. Thanks for, well, that's one of the sections here. Thanks.
She's a plant. Ken
Transition.
planted that
All
question.
All right. Yeah. A little out of order, but I am going to answer that question as we go along. So let's move ahead then to the next thing, which was, look at this hammer. This is a 19th century piano, and the hammers are layered with wood, then hard leather, then a hard chamois, then another harder felt, and then finally overlaid with a softer felt. Now this is an Erard hammer, but many Broadwoods and lots and lots of pianos in the 19th century were built like this. The idea being that we had gone over from having leather hammers that were not all that dependable from skin to skin, and also they didn't last that long. So Erard was employing a few pretty sharp people in those days, and one of them came up with the idea that maybe we try some felt on this. And the felt that was quite handy in Paris in those days was for making hats, beaver skin hats. So what we find in looking at some of the old Chopin era hammers is that there's a blend of various fibers in there, wool and beaver. But it's a very soft outer layer, and the idea being that we want on a soft blow for this top section of the hammer to be collapsing and making a nice soft sound. But when we play harder, we want the harder stuff underneath. Now, when the Dolge press comes along, we're able to create all of this effect in one fell swoop, where we bend the piece of felt around the molding and create a great deal of compression right in the middle. And that's how we get the hardness on the inside, the softness on the outside. But what to do with 19th century pianos when we want to actually reuse? This is a quite unique hammer, and we want to reuse that if possible. So here's a situation in which I set about to replace those top layers of felt. But in this same kind of situation where there's no compression on the inside, if I'm going to hand apply this felt, how do I get this hammer harder on the inside than it is on the outside? And now we're stepping back to B72 and the effects of a fast evaporating solvent. So we know that B72 moves towards the direction of evaporation. And so in this case, I'm planning on that. I'm counting on the fact that if I apply B72 to the inside surface away from the strike point, that it's going to move in, but then it's going to move back out. So I'm going to have a concentration of heavier B72 on the inside and less as I go further in. So that's by design. It's engineered into my thinking that that's what's going to happen. So, and then I was able to bend them into this shape so that they dried in that condition right there. So it made it a little easier for us to install the hammer felt. Anybody recognize what this is? It's part of an old fluorescent light fixture. Those things used to be around all over the place. So here was the process. I, cut the old felt off, making sure not to nick into the lower layers. Peeled it off with a knife. I had shaped my felt and so that it was fatter, just like on a modern hammer. It's fatter in the middle and tapers off. This can be glued on the inside first and attached with a strip tie as a clamp using hide glue. Then once that's set, this can be, hide glue can be applied to this. This very firmly pulled with one hand, finger and thumb, just firmly pull it and stretch it around the other side and apply another strip tie. Once this is cut away once it's dried. So this is on the second day you would do this. Pull this really hard around with the glue in place, use another strip tie to hold it there, and then quickly put it into a clamp. This is just, this pivots and there's a wedge that holds it. And each one of these is I had to make about 25 sizes so that these always fit the curve as it, and then when that is dried, then out it comes, is trimmed, and we're left over with a fairly nice hammer. Sides had to be trimmed, things like that, but there we have a hammer that has the right taper. It's thicker here than and nicely tapered around. And I know from the B72 that I applied that it's actually harder here. So what I'm doing here is simulating compression. So the result of this was a very nice sounding hammer. I was really happy with the results. I don't yet have a recording of this piano because of COVID. I'm not able to get back around to that piano with recording equipment, but I've heard it. I've heard some nice Chopin played on it, and it is a very, very nice sound. So what else though? I mean, here we've used a couple of tools out of the museum conservation trick book, but here's another thing, which is low viscosity epoxies. Now, let's go back to our long chain of thermoplastics. Epoxy is nothing more than that. They're long chains, and they just kind of slip around as a liquid. They slip around back and forth without any attraction to each other until something else is introduced, which is a monomer, and that joins the strain, the long chains, so that they cross-link. And this is how epoxies go from being a liquid to being a solid. Now, most of the time we're dealing with epoxies because we need to glue two things together, as using epoxy as a glue and adhesive. And the other thing that we reach for epoxy for is gap filling. So that if we have a space between, say, our pen block and our pen block flange, we want to make sure that that space is filled. We're going to reach for an epoxy that does a little gap filling there. Its primary purpose is to resist. And, you know, that's kind of as far as we go with epoxies that we're used to. But in museum conservation, we're reaching out to use low viscosity epoxies, just like we were talking about getting it to go into wood cells. We can get it to go into cracks in wood. And the trick here is that this epoxy has to have two very distinct qualities. It has to have the viscosity of water or close to it. Now, that is way different than West System. And it's way different than anything else you can normally buy sold as a thinned epoxy, because they get it to be thin with solvents. So if you take your normal wood rot repair and you pour that stuff mixed up into a thimble and you wait a day, is that thimble going to be full of epoxy? No, it will not. There'll be hardly any epoxy down in the bottom. Because it's mostly solvents. So what we need is an epoxy which is 100% solids and also has a hardness when it is cured. So this combination of something that's hard like plexiglass, hard like, you know, something that you can really set a screw in, and something that starts off as a liquid so that you can get it to go inside of what you're looking for. So yeah, suppose it is wood. I've used it in pen blocks. I had a Groff piano at the Smithsonian that we x-rayed and found that there were all kinds of woodworm holes all over inside of it. We flooded those holes with epoxy and flooded the tuning pen holes with epoxy, then re-drilled for the original tuning pins, and that instrument is in good playable condition at the Smithsonian. That's one of the first times that we used that. More recently, though, another thing has come up, and that is, what about stripped out holes in Steinway action frames? Because our go-to method of taking care of this was just to buy a new action frame from Steinway. And Steinway has decided that those are no longer on their available parts list. So I started thinking, well, what could I experiment with here? So I got a hardwood maple dowel. I drilled some holes in it. I put some flange screws down in there, and then I turned them until they completely stripped. I used a big honking wrench and just made them mush. And then I took some low viscosity epoxy and filled those holes. And what I found was that most of the epoxy over a period of the cure time, which is, in this case, it's 48-hour cure. It seems like the longer cure time is a result of something that allows you to have something really, really thin. So after 48 hours, I was able to re-drill these holes. Most of the epoxy had not evaporated, but gone into the wood cells, which I could feel by putting a needle in there. I could feel that it's not really wood there. This is really much harder. So the next step was to do it on an action frame. So Dale Irwin and I were talking on the phone. I told him I had this idea, and he sent me 2 Steinway action frames out of his trash bin. And this is an example, close-up photograph of very, very badly stripped holes and cracks in the brass. And so this is a photograph that I took after I'd filled the holes with this low viscosity epoxy. And you can see the epoxy is now traveling along the crack. It is now between the brass and the dowel. It's in the crack, and it is, it's everywhere. So I also found that by applying clamps that I could close while the epoxy was still wet, I could close the cracks. And then finally, what I tried to do was put a flange screw down in there. Well, that didn't work because now there's some epoxy that's still left over in here. It didn't all soak in. So you have to drill that out. And then it's really too tough for you to be able to just put a flange screw in. So I made a cutter out of an old flange screw and put it into my my holder here, and re-threaded my flange screw threads. So the whole thing was also tested to see if we got a little more stability out of this rail. So this is my dial indicator that, and a weight that's sitting on the rail in the middle to see how much flex I could get out of it. And this was a comparison I did before and after, and I found that the rail itself was much more stable following this. We did get some deflection. That's like a 25-pound weight sitting on the rail. Finally, I sent it back to Dale Irwin. And what Dale did was they used this action frame. You know, they sell pre-hung hammer shanks and flanges. And so they would screw on a set of shanks and flanges and then hang the hammers, take them off, and do that again. So this became their accelerated wear chamber. They did this over and over and over again until they were willing to say, well, yeah, Ken, I think it works. So this is the example of a low viscosity epoxy that's been used to consolidate the wood. Again, this started off with hammer consolidation, consolidating the felt. Then we went over to using reverse migration to control where the consolidant went, where the resin wound up staying. And then we also were able to dip into the low viscosity epoxies to consolidate wood. And in this case, glue everything together again, including the brass rails. So this is now in the stage of being developed as a kit for technicians, where the epoxy is difficult to deal with because it is extremely tricky in terms of how the mix ratio. It has to be by weight, and it's very fussy. But we found that the manufacturer is working with us and going to supply it in bubble packs so that small amounts of epoxy can be mixed. It's all pre-measured. It's mixed within its envelope and then poured out into a glass jar. And then we can supply a mini pipette that'll allow people to fill the screw holes from the bottom up without any mess or waste. And then we'll also have to supply a set of flange screws because we're going to make a cutter to fit those screws. So we'll probably offer some variety of screws available, genuine Steinway parts if you want, or whatever. We're going to offer some choices. And we'll include some kind of instructional video and price it in such a way that everybody can afford it. And then when we need more epoxy, then we can send those out as on demand. The trick with this kind of epoxy is that in small quantities, it's okay to ship. Otherwise, it's hazardous materials. There's hexane and a few other things in this stuff that makes it a risk to fly it on an airplane. So the hazardous shipping materials is an extreme expense. And this way, by shipping it in very small envelopes, we can cut that down. So I'm going to stop the sharing. And I've taken us to about 10 minutes, 12 minutes before the end of the show, and take questions now, or we can all
Pat Wilbur was asking if you were using Epotech.
It is one of the Epotech products, but epoxy technology has been bought out by a company in Georgia. And these are, they're products that are available, but they're increasingly making sure that you have difficulty getting them in anything except large quantities. So that's why I got some as a sample from the company. I've done some business with them in the past, and that's one of their products. But it's not readily available in small amounts. So
Alan Eder asked, have you tried any other methods of stiffening Steinway action rails?
Yes. I did when I was at Northwestern. We bought some maple dowels from Steinway, and we wound up being able to press out the old maple dowel and put in new maple dowels. That was pretty arduous, and I can see why not a lot of people do it. And it doesn't account for any cracking in the brass rails either. So no, my solution, like many other people, has been to just buy them from Steinway.
And let's see if we got there's no other questions per se. And by the way, David Anderson arrived somewhere around about a quarter after. I didn't mention he had to be out for the first few minutes, but he's around, and maybe he'll check in. But yeah, let's see what else we got here. David Skolnick says, can you say again that the rails are no longer available from Steinway?
The assembled action brackets with, the assembled action frame is no longer being sold by Steinway. They are continuing to sell the individual pre-drilled rails, but that's the extent of it. And I understand that there is a backlog of, I don't know that they have any of those parts available. You'd have to ask Steinway. But yeah, I spoke with Kent Webb at Steinway about this recently, and he said that it was just, he didn't offer any explanation for it. He just said that, Steinway's in the business of manufacturing pianos, and part supply is, always been a thing that they didn't really support that much. So anyway, I think it is in line with their efforts to encourage people to buy new Steinways, and you can't blame them for that. I'm glad they're there. I'm glad Steinway's making pianos. And that's as much as I'll say about that.
however much it's frustrating. I noticed Andrew Edwards said hi earlier. Is that someone you've been working with, or
You know,
is that just
Andrew,
some?
yeah, Andrew came through the same program as you did, Ethan. He was at Northwestern as
Oh,
one of
okay,
our
cool.
interns, and he has gone on to be the head of piano technology at University of Texas in Austin, and is quite a big shot now. Hello, Andrew.
Oh, wow. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, hey, everybody.
How's it out down there at UT Austin? That sounds like a fun place to be in music.
It's good. Well, we have a great school and a great set of technicians down there. And we actually, during our lockdown, we took Ken's soundboard course together through Zoom, and we really enjoyed that.
Very cool. So he didn't mess your head up. You got your head on straight from Ken Eschete.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That'll happen. Yeah, let's see if we got any other. I don't have any other questions over here. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Want to say hi to Ken or give your own 2 cents on any of this stuff? Has anybody been using, paralloid or epoxy or tried their own type of methodologies with these action rails? I'm sure people are using paralloid. That's becoming, the word got out, and not everybody's into it. But I think we've got a handful of people.
Yeah.
Carl Lieberman, have you used it? You haven't? No. Who has? Anybody here? Alan Eder? You tried it? Paralloid B72?
I still use key tops.
Still use key tops.
It's just another tool for the toolbox. That's all there is to it. I'll say this, that if you spill a little bit of your acetone and key tops on your keyboard, you're in trouble. Not so with alcohol. So.
That's nice. Yeah. Earlier when you said, I think you said you were getting very frustrated. I think with something around the voicing or whatever, and you brought up the next slide, and that showed your grain alcohol, and I thought you were just going to say, and that's what led me to drink.
Yeah, I can say something about grain alcohol though, which is a curious thing that at that proof level, at 190 proof, it is illegal to sell in many of the states. But as it turns out that there's no law about interstate commerce. And so the companies that sell online, like Total Wine and more, will sell Everclear 190 if you buy it online and pay for it online. So a curious story was that I have one of those stores here in Spokane, and I went to the store and I said, do you have Everclear 190? And they said, no, we have it in 150 strength, but not 190. And so I went home immediately and looked it up on the web page, which I was sure I saw that they had 190. And so I paid for it online with my credit card. And within a half an hour, I got an email that said that your order is ready for pickup at the same store that I was just at. So I don't know what the deal is, but
Ken?
yes.
This is Dave Skolnick again. I will say that I think the Everclear is more available on the West Coast. The product that I found on the East Coast that's comparable is called Graves.
Yes.
Same, but even in New York, as far as I know, unless somebody is putting their license on the line, you can't get it. But I'm right near Connecticut border. In Connecticut, you can get it. So
yeah,
it's good, and it's a strange tasting stuff. I'll tell you that.
Oh, I have not actually tasted it. Yeah, and Andre Olbrook in Europe has switched over to using it, and he showed me the name of the product that he gets in Europe, which is grain alcohol. He said that his old hammer hardening substance was becoming very difficult to get because it was ether based and
Collodion.
collodion, right? So you said that he has changed over completely to. It's interesting. I call it B72. Everybody in the conservation business calls it B72. Over the years, it was known as acryloid B72, and why it was the front name was changed to paraloid B72 is a mystery to me. But yeah, everybody in the business calls it just B72. It's like, yeah, I use air in my tires. You know, that's that's how common it is.
Hello, Ethan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Richard
Hi-ho,
Cap.
Silver away.
Yeah, Richard Cap in Boulder, Colorado.
Hey.
So I just recently used the B72 on a set of hammers, just as Ken suggested, full strength on the top 5 or so and half strength a little below that. Full strength on the bottom 6 or 7, and it just really brought out the tone. It was wonderful.
Wow, that's great. I hear those comments all the time, but I can tell you that when I've tried it the first time, I was really really shocked and happy with the results, and I have been very satisfied with the sound, and all of my customers have too. So that's the real nice thing. People seem to think that I'm a better tuner because I get this out of my case when they aren't looking and they can't really smell what I've done. You know, suddenly that part of the piano is really sounding so much better. It's because I've tuned it so much better.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of where a lot of things are going. I mean, I think that the best technicians out there are using all the tools in their toolkit to make the piano sound good. And of course, the customer's just gonna think of it as tuning. And maybe, you know, some people say tuning is part of voicing, or voicing is part of tuning, or whatever. It all goes together. Your job is to make the instrument sound good. So if you know how to do it, you get the gigs. All right, cool. Well, we're just about at a 1 minute out there, and as always, Ken, you bring the serious knowledge, and we appreciate that. Thank you for preparing that presentation and putting some thought into things. Make sure people let them know one more time where to check out more things from you, and then we'll do a sign off.
Okay, good. Well, I'm at on the web at Bent Side Arts. BENTSIDE. That's the curvy side of your grand piano. And arts is tacked onto that. So it's all one word, bentsidearts.com. And you'll find all the information that we were talking about and new products as we announce them.
Cool. I'll put a link in the chat there so people can click on it and see. Hopefully that'll work, the one I put in there. And of course, as always, we put a few more links in the chat. You can go to Piano Tech Masterclasses.com. You can get some of the recordings from our previous convention, or you can sign up for one of our monthly subscriptions. Right now we're releasing classes from the previous conventions on a monthly clip, so you get a new lecture every month. And make sure you give us your feedback. There's also a link there in the chat for that. So yeah, thanks a lot, Ken. A lot of great feedback when you participate, so we appreciate that. Hope we'll have you back soon next week. Bill Monroe, excited to have him back on with us. And if there's nothing else, we'll sign ourselves off.
Okay.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. See you all next week. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Remember that you can catch us live online every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's right. Go to pianotechradio.com to register so you can interact live and ask questions of our guests.
See you next week.